Scheme.
This meeting is being recorded.
Organized by the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub in collaboration with CHS Alliance and the National PSA Network, and in close consultation with the Society of Human Resource Management in Ethiopia. As you all know, safeguarding issue is becoming a very critical issue in the world, in the humanitarian sector, in the civil society, as well as in all other sectors. And this webinar is part of the effort to protect vulnerable people from any form of sexual exploitation and abuse. As you know, safeguarding issues and sexual exploitation and abuse could occur and happen in a workplace. And employers have different processes in recruitment to safeguard from hiring, someone with the background of safeguarding issues. But currently, due to lack of sharing of information among the sector, people who have issues of different form of safeguarding with a history of sexual exploitation and abuse jump from one organization to one organization without clear accountability. So the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme have been established, to have a confidential information sharing among different organizations and different sectors. In today's webinar, we'll try to cover how this scheme has been established, how it works, how organization can be members, and how can, information among signatory organizations shared confidentially. We have experts among us today. I would like to warmly welcome and briefly introduce you today's panelists. We have here with me today in this webinar and Zek, and she is working with the Steering Committee for Humanitarian Response, coordinating the interagency Misconduct Disclosure Scheme, which aims to improve recruitment practices and limit the movement of perpetrators of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment between organizations. HANDS is actively involved in promoting safer recruitment practices and in advocating for more robust knowledge exchange within the humanitarian and development sector. Before joining this effort and this organization, she has been supporting various initiatives, and she has worked also for Oxfam, where I have been also part of the organization in the past. And welcome, ENS, and all these awaiting attendances. Look forward to hear and to learn from your expertise. I have here with me also Maria Sharzem. She is the interagency PSA coordinator for Ethiopia and a senior technical expert and seasoned trainer on protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. She will be with us today and will share with us the practical experience in the national PSA network and how this scheme is working and how information is shared among the PSA network members. I have technical expertise supporting me in this webinar today. So Sina, the regional associate for RSH, and how we will be supporting technically. My name is Mikhail Shifarau. I am the head of the global support unit at Humanita International. I'm based in Kampala, Uganda, and virtually also working from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And today I have joined from Addis. Nice to meet you all, and I would like to kindly invite ENS to make a presentation to us. And there are some notice, I hope all of you have read, which was displayed, and you all be in mute during the session. The videos will be turned off except the presenter and the facilitators. And if you have any question, any feedback, you can use the chat box, and we'll try to summarize the question and address at the end of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Mikhail, for the introduction. Can I ask for the presentation, please? Or let me know if you want me to share from my side, that's fine as well. Hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm connecting today from Rzeszów in Poland. Many thanks to Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub for organizing this webinar. And for giving me an opportunity to speak about the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme. And I'm delighted to be here today in such good company. Both Maria and Mikhail are experts when it comes to HR and PSEA. So I can't wait to hear your questions and connect with you after our presentations. Thank you so much. Can I have the next slide, please? So I will start today by introducing the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme to all of you. The scheme has been established in 2018 and launched in 2019, so we've been around for some time, and I'm sure that some of you have heard about the scheme in its earlier years. The scheme, as Michael said, is facilitated by SCHR. And it's very important to emphasize before we jump into the details that the scheme complements and not replaces other checks, referencing checks, which you might have in place. And it's also very important to emphasize, and I will share more details about this, that the scheme holds no information on specific cases of abuse. This is linked to data protection regulations, and I'm sure we'll have some questions about this at the end of the session. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just to give you some background, so what the scheme is doing, it's a tool which allows you to share information related to misconduct. And when I say misconduct, when it comes to Misconduct Disclosure Scheme, this means sexual misconduct, so sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. So the scheme is a tool that allows you to share this information between you and other employers. There are two commitments linked with the scheme. The first one is to make sure that when you are running a recruitment, you are conducting those checks and you are connecting previous employers to ask if there have been any issues related to sexual exploitation, abuse, or harassment linked to the candidate which you are planning to hire. And the second commitment is to make sure that when you are approached for such information, you are sharing them, of course, if there is anything to share. And what, excuse me, and what you get in turn, you get more information so that you know whom you are hiring. And what is the scheme's ambition is to make sure that at some point we are conducting those checks for all staff we are hiring. Next staff, please. So just to explain a little bit more about why do we need the scheme in the first place. So of course, sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as sexual harassment, had a huge impact on our organizations. And this is also closely linked to our principles and values, such as do no harm. And that's why we were thinking as SCHR that the tools such as the scheme could be used by the wider community and could be provided by all organizations to make sure that we are all able to exchange those information. Next slide, please. And what you can see on this slide is a brief timeline on what happened so far for the scheme. I won't go into much details here. You will receive the slides after this presentation, but this is just to show you that we've been around for 3 years and now we are in the 4th year. And over the years, our implementing organizations have been conducting lots of checks and exchanging those informations which I've mentioned. Can I have the next slide, please? And I will also show you more statistics later in my presentation. But before we go to the statistics, let me talk briefly about what the scheme does, and maybe more importantly, what it doesn't do, because I think this will help us understand how does this initiative work. So let's start with what does the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme actually do. So as I've said before, it gives you a tool which allows you to request information related to sexual misconduct, which might have been committed by your potential new hires. It's very important to emphasize that it's respecting data protection and employment law, and this is something that, of course, have been flagged with us from the very beginning. So there is lots of lessons learned and best practice that I can share when it comes to legal regulations and how are they influencing the implementation of the scheme. Very importantly, the scheme enables you to get more information so that you know whom you are hiring. And then in the end, by giving you this information and letting you to make a well-informed decision, it protects the people you work with. Next slide, please. And moving on, it might be interesting also to look at what the scheme doesn't do. So first of all, it doesn't blacklist or whitelist people. This is not a central database where you can feed the name and surname of your candidate, and you will see if that person has committed any sexual misconduct in the past. This is not possible because of the legal regulations, unfortunately. I agree that it would be great to have a central database, but unfortunately, similar initiatives to the scheme have been blocked in the past because it was not possible to establish a central database. And that's why we've changed the approach and decided to introduce a tool that relies on exchange of information between organizations. And very important to flag here before we move further is that the scheme is not a substitute for everything else that your organization has in place when it comes to prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. This is just a tool that looks at improving the referencing practices, and it's very important to make sure that this is linked with other preventive measures your organization has in place. Next slide, please. And now, before we go even further, I would like to show you how the scheme looks in practice and what is this tool which can be used to request information related to sexual misconduct looks like. So what you see on the screen right now, it's something that we call statement of conduct. So this is the tool which we are asking you to use every time when you are running a recruitment to make sure that you are requesting answers to all those questions. If you look at this screen, you probably think, oh, this looks just like your regular reference request. So this was developed like that on purpose, because thanks to this, it can easily be adapted and just merge with your existing reference checks, because we've heard from HR professionals that this is easier practice and it's easier if there is one form rather than having multiple forms which are sent to past employers. Next slide, please. And then once you've signed up to the scheme, once you've merged that form which you've seen on the previous slide, it's time to use the scheme for the first time. So here we have a new employee on this slide and the employment history of that individual. So you can see a list of employers. Some of them are implementing the scheme, some of them are not implementing the scheme. It's very important to remember that the scheme asks you to make sure you are sending out this statement of conduct, which you've seen on the previous slide, to all employers. It doesn't matter if they are implementing the scheme or not. And we found out that even organizations who are not part of the scheme are willing to share information related to past cases of sexual misconduct. When you are signing up to the scheme, you are making a commitment to make sure that you are requesting those information to cover last 5 years. So that's why you can see 4 gray arrows, because those 4 employers are covering past 5 years. And then the yellow dotted line is linking us to the employer from before the 5 years. And then some organizations are starting to check references looking back 10 years. It of course depends on the capacity you have internally. Next slide, please. So let's move to more theoretical approach again. And then we will go back to some statistics so that you can see how the scheme has been performing in the past years. So this is something that we are using to illustrate what is the idea behind the scheme. So we want to create this cycle in which organizations are signing up to the scheme. They are starting to use the statement of conduct, which you've seen on that form to request information related to sexual misconduct. By doing that, we are building this collective confidence that it's possible to request those information, that we are hearing back, and that we are receiving. This is very important, that we are not only asking, but we are hearing back, and we are receiving the information related to sexual misconduct cases, and you will see the numbers related to that shortly. And I have to admit that looking back, in the past 3 years, this approach has been working very well. And it's really key to make sure that we are involving our implementing organizations in this conversation, because of course I talk a lot about the scheme during briefings such as this one, but in the end, I'm not the one implementing the scheme. So everything that I'm telling you today is coming from our implementing organizations. And I've seen that some of them are present here today. So it's fantastic to see so many of you joining us today. Next slide, please. And just to talk a little bit more about our members. So we've started back in 2019 with 14 organizations who've been piloting, and I would say testing, this initiative for us to see if the scheme can be used in practice. This was very new, so we had to address a number of challenges, and it was all possible thanks to hard work of HR professionals, PSEA staff, and everyone else who was really involved in this first year of the scheme. Right now, we have over 130 organizations, and those include INGOs, local NGOs, private sector organizations, as well as UNHCR agencies, and UNHCR is currently piloting the scheme. With other UN agencies starting shortly, we also are in conversation with our first donor who is looking into signing up to the scheme. And when it comes to the size of our members, so this varies a lot. We have a large, well-known confederation, and we have some small national organizations or network with often less than 15 employees. So as you can see, the scheme can be used by all organizations. It doesn't matter what is your background and what is the size of your organization. Next slide, please. And now, as I've promised, I will show you what is the impact of the scheme and how it was working in the past years. So between 2019 and 21, our implementing organization conducted over 25,500 checks. And all those checks led to 142 applications being rejected at the final stage of recruitment because it was found that the candidates had sexual misconduct on their files. So this is a really important number because this shows that the scheme is needed and that it is able to detect cases which otherwise might have slipped through the gaps, and we might have not been able to detect them. And moving on, next slide, please. This is just some more statistics to show you that the number of checks is growing and our implementing organizations are conducting more and more checks. Of course, the idea is to make sure that at some point we will reach the time when those checks will be conducted for all new hires by all organizations, because we all need to work together to make sure that we know whom we are hiring and to make sure that we are detecting any past cases of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And then I will move a little bit to the future. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is a slide that shows you what are we planning for the future of the scheme. So first of all, we want to make sure that the implementation amongst our current members is very systematic, and this means that we are meeting the commitments of the scheme. As I've said at the beginning, this is to make sure that we are conducting those checks every time when we are running a recruitment. Then we are also looking into increased membership. I've also touched on this a little bit. It's really important to make sure that we all run some sort of safeguarding checks as part of referencing practices, because we need to make sure that we ask and exchange all those information. Then we are also looking into extending the scope of the scheme. So this means that the scheme will be applied to consultants and volunteers, board members, and other categories of staff. So this is a work in progress, and I realize that there are some issues and challenges which we are facing, especially if someone has a really long employment history or haven't worked in the past. But this is just the initial stage, and we are looking into some practical solutions. Then we are also looking into more engagement with local and national organizations to make sure that this can be used by everyone and that this works for everyone. So your feedback would be very much welcomed. We are also looking into closer engagement with UN agencies. We have UNHCR piloting the scheme now, and some other organizations, some other UN agencies, sorry, looking into starting implementing the scheme as well. So that's fantastic news. And we are also closely working with donors to see how they can support the scheme and how can they implement the scheme on their own. And next slide, please. And I would just like to briefly go to the beginning and one more time remind everyone, why do we need the scheme in the first place, and why is it so important to make sure that we are requesting those information? So as you've seen earlier in the presentation, up to date, the scheme stopped 142 applications coming from people who had sexual misconduct on their files. And in addition to that, I'm sure that we've all heard some anecdotal evidence that individuals who have committed sexual misconduct are still being hired and are still being able to move between organizations because the referencing checks are not being done. And it's very important to emphasize that very often previous sexual misconduct is not picked up by criminal checks. So you might have criminal checks already in place, but the cases which are investigated internally by organizations are not referred to the police and are not investigated by the police. So those are two separate checks. And then previous employers often remain reluctant to share data on previous misconduct because, of course, there are some questions about the legal side of sharing such data. So I'm delighted to confirm that, as you've seen in the statistics, this is slowly being addressed. This is not a problem, and the scheme is never asking you to disclose something that you can't legally disclose in your jurisdiction. So moving on, next slide, please. Just to stop and talk a little bit more about risk perception and how do we look at risk. So I think that the risk of making checks using the misconduct disclosure scheme is very visible because we are worried about potential legal exposure. We are worried about blacklisting someone. We are also worried about potential financial risk if our past employee is unhappy, for example, with our decision to share the data and decides to sue us. But we are often not seeing the risk of not making checks. And this will lead to, of course, people we work with suffering further abuse because very often perpetrators of sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment carry on perpetuating their behaviors. And this is, of course, linked to huge reputational and financial risk. And I think that up to date, as you've seen earlier in the presentation, while we stop over 140 individuals with misconduct data on their files, we had no complaints and no lawsuits whatsoever linked to the scheme. So I think that this shows that we really need to switch the perception and make sure that we are more worried about not conducting checks than by possible risks which are linked with making checks, as those situations never happened in the past. Next slide, please. I won't go into the details here, but I just wanted to flag that I'm aware that there is a lot of initiatives when it comes to screening candidates. So we will have this presentation afterwards, but I'm just briefly linking the misconduct disclosure scheme with other initiatives such as ClearCheck, which is a UN-only tool for screening individuals, then Project Soteria, which is Interpol's led, so that's the UK's government project, which is looking into criminal checks and making sure that we are improving our practices when it comes to conducting criminal checks. Then we have the aid worker registration scheme, which will possibly be piloted later this year. And this will be looking into having some sort of authorized employment history available for all new employers. So this will basically address the issues with candidates hiring part of their employment in their CVs. Next slide, please. So just to emphasize one more time, what could be some of the reasons for joining the scheme? So implementation of the scheme helps you protect your staff and community members. It helps you also achieve some donors' requirements when it comes to safer recruitment. And very importantly, it's a public commitment that your organization is committed to PSEH, and that this is something that that is important for you and that you're striving to improve in this area, which I think we all, we all have a lot of do in this area, and we all have quite a lot of to improve when it comes to recruitment, especially in emergencies when we need to hire staff as soon as possible. We need to deploy them. So if anyone is interested in those practices, there is quite a lot of best practice which was shared by our current members. And the next slide, please. And just to say that why I'm encouraging you to join the scheme, there is lots of support available from the side of a CHR, as well as our current members, because we had more than 140 organizations go through the preparation. So we usually link new members with the older members to just make sure that they are not duplicating and not developing the same policies or tools internally. You can see more information on the website, which will be shared with you in the chat box. And on the next slide, you will see my contact details, and you will have them after the call. So I will stop here for now and hand over to Mikhail and Maria. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ines, for this very informative presentation. I hope everyone have benefited from the presentation. And there are few questions from participants, and we'll come back to answering those questions later. And I will invite you back, Hans, for answering some of the questions. And I would like to invite now Maria to share some practical experiences from the national PSA network perspectives. The National PSA Network is a UN-led platform where many civil society organizations, international NGOs are member with, and there are various experience sharing and trainings and practices on the scheme. So Maria will share with us some of the practical learnings from the scheme. Thank you very much. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me. And as Michael was just explaining, I have been asked to provide a very short brief on the Ethiopia PSA network, sort of step-by-step interaction and collaboration with the scheme, which is still in early stages. And as a bit of background, here in Ethiopia, the PSA network was established in 2018, and we have one national level network as well as 8 sub-networks spread throughout the country with over 250 trained PSA focal points. Our focus is mainly on interagency and cross-sectoral coordination, on capacity building, on communications and community engagement, and on survivor support. And of course, within these, considering the current situation in Ethiopia, the network has been stressing risk identification and mitigation together with our PSA focal points. And of course, amongst other factors, HR processes play a key role in this regard. And this is really how we originally connected with Ines and the scheme. And I must stress and say that Ines has been great support from day one, and sort of how it took place was that in our initial sort of bilateral conversation, she explained the scheme and its processes to the co-chairs and myself. And then we provided an overview of our network members to Ines so she could provide a breakdown of who's already involved in the scheme. And for us initially, this was around 10 to 15 NGOs, as well as one UN agency, which is UNHCR. And to increase participation in the scheme in Ethiopia, we agreed to organize an ad hoc meeting on the scheme, which was well intended by all our PSEA focal points, where Ines presented an overview quite similar to the one today. And the focal points were able to ask questions and raise any concern. And during that meeting, it was sort of agreed to have a smaller focus group discussion with interested members. Around 30 members attended, focusing more specifically on data sharing at the request of our PSEA focal points. And our members in particular asked questions when it comes to, membership and how to join, legal requirements, buy-in from senior management was a concern, and then of course the focal points responsibility themselves within the scheme, considering that this is mainly or a lot relies on HR and not all of our PSEA focal points naturally work in HR. It was then jointly agreed as a part of the focus group discussion for me to organize a meeting with senior management in Ethiopia, as their buy-in is very important, and then of course have a dedicated session with the HR working group as well. When we originally proposed to have the scheme as an agenda point to the UN country team, they were very positive. And actually they said that instead of having it as an agenda point, they wanted to have a dedicated session to the scheme. And that's something that will be coming up in the next week. So all in all, this has been a very easy and straightforward process for the network to get involved in. And I urge other networks to do the same. And I look forward to seeing, the developments as the weeks and months go by, with especially, senior management buy-in and getting more organizations involved. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria, for this informative experience sharing. I hope attendants have benefited from this experience. So this is time for question and answer. We have many questions coming as a large attendance today, and we appreciate that across the world from different regions, we have attendants of this webinar. And we have few questions that we will try to answer in the coming minutes. And if time allows, we may also try to address and ask additional questions as well. Many people have requested whether this presentation will be shared. Yes, as Sosna from RSH confirmed, the presentation, additional resources of the website of the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme and RSH will be available for you, and we'll be sharing those. We'll try to answer some of the questions. I will try to summarize and present to the presenters so that they will try to address shortly. There is a question about the membership. Maybe Hans will try to answer that. Yeah, this Misconduct Disclosure Scheme have been established by humanitarian organization, and the current membership is mainly from humanitarian civil society organization. But there is a question that either other sectors could be a member, and a possibility like public university, a private sector, and another international organization which are not humanitarian and are focusing development. And this is the first question I would like to be addressed about membership. And the second question is about some practical aspects and how this scheme is implemented at grassroots level, locally within the community. So it's related also how maybe, community-based civil society organization and others could benefit from this scheme. You have tried already to cover about the legal aspects, but there is a question which asks how this will be treated legally, and in terms of the legal aspect, the coverage, how the protection will be again in this regards. Let us try to address these three questions, and Ins will try to address. And there is one question also which Maria would try to answer, which is about the protection of sexual exploitation and abuse. And there is a question how the PSA is focusing only in workplaces, how we will address widely abuses at home, abuses at community level. And Maria, you may share with us your experience. I know that this is covered mainly in the code of conduct of the organizations, but how this will be covered beyond the workplace. Thank you very much. I will come back if time allows.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm sorry for laughing, but there are always legal questions, which is very important. But let me start with the first question, which was about the membership and for whom the scheme is open. So at the very beginning, it was opened only for humanitarian organizations, but very quickly we've realized that this is not the best approach. And now the scheme is opened for all types of organizations. So we have private sector organizations, we have UNHCR piloting, we have a number of for example, consultancy groups, which are based, I don't remember now, but I think in Malawi. So we have a wide range of backgrounds when it comes to our members. So if you want to join the scheme, I'm putting a link in the chat box right now. So please follow that link and read what's needed to join the scheme. You will also find my contact details. And even if you think that your organization shouldn't be joining, that's not true. We are not accepting only humanitarian organizations. Everyone can join the scheme because we are all hiring staff and the staff is moving between sectors. So it's important to make sure that we are all able to conduct those checks. And then moving on, there was a question about implementing the scheme locally. So this is something that we've been at the grassroots level, So this is something that we've been looking at for a long time. And this has been started, for example, with, as Maria introduced to us, with the Ethiopia PSEA network. We've been also working with other local organizations. We have a number of local organizations implementing the scheme right now. We've also have a conversation with our current members who are both local organizations, but also large INGOs. And of course, they are very different. So we've been looking into how to make it easier and how to make sure that this is working for organizations at the grassroots level. So we will have ICFA. This is an organization that has a number of hubs. One is in Geneva, one is, I think, in Nairobi, and I don't remember where are the other two. Sorry about that. But they will be leading the involvement with the national organizations. And then we've also been reaching out to some HR practitioners and organizations who are local organizations involved in grassroots activities to just speak with them and see what they think is stopping them from implementing the scheme. So if you have any feedback to share on this, or if you would like to have a bilateral conversation, do feel free to reach out to me after this conversation. But as I've said, this is really a priority for us. And we don't want to impose the misconduct disclosure scheme. The misconduct disclosure scheme is open to change. We are reviewing it on an annual basis based on feedback from our members. So we are open to make changes to make sure that this is something that can be applied by all organizations everywhere. It doesn't matter what work you are doing and how you are operating. And then the last question is the legal question. So this is a very fair point, and I have to admit that especially if you are a small organization, the legal side is very complex, it looks scary, and very often the regulations which are applicable in jurisdictions are changing, or you need to make some special steps to make sure that you are aligned with them. So the good news is that, first of all, we have over 130 organizations, and the scheme is now implemented almost in every country around the world, which means in practice that organizations already went through this process and mapped the legal requirements in all countries. There are two types of legal regulations which are applicable to the scheme, and that is the national labor law and data protection regulations. Up to date, SCHR has been mapping the legal situation in all jurisdictions to support our members. Up to date, we've identified only one country where it's definitely not possible to implement the scheme, and that's one of the European countries. And then we've also, we are trying to engage a legal organization to make sure that they are providing us with some legal guidance. And this will be available on our website, because this will be some sort of a one-stop shop for all your legal needs. You will be able to go to the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme website and just see that I want to implement the scheme in Ethiopia. Here is the guidance, what I need to do from the legal side. And usually this is actually something that your organization already is doing and knows better than me, because if you have any type of reference checks in place, this means that you've already went through this legal preparation and you know what type of information can be shared and how it can be shared. So I know that this sounds scary, but in practice, this is much simpler than it looks to be. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If time allows, since there are a few questions to come back to you as well, but I will invite kindly Maria to answer a few questions. And there are some more questions has arrived so that you can try to address together, Maria. The first question is about the protection of sexual exploitation and abuse, why we are focusing only in workplace, while various abuses occur at family and a community level. So how this type of abuses could be addressed in terms of protection of vulnerable people from sexual exploitation and abuse. There is another question also related to the PCA network. There is an appreciation that UN agencies are actively participating and in the picture with this, and there is a practical question whether UN agencies are benefiting from this misconduct disclosure scheme, and if there is any plan to further expand the membership to other UN agencies. And also if child abuse is part of that. And there is a basic one question about, we are repeatedly using the term safeguarding related to sexual exploitation and abuse. I know that we have covered this in different forums, but you may try to briefly explain what we mean by safeguarding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was a lot of questions. Yeah, I think I will start with sort of focusing on what's the mandate. And in Ethiopia, we have a PSCA network. So we don't have a PSCA-H network. And I know that's different, of course, from country to country, and also within organization, what's the focus on the focal points. So sort of what we are focusing on, of course, is then the relationship and the do no harm between development and humanitarian staff and the affected communities that we are working with. Of course, SCA is a form of GBV, and we are working very closely with the GBV and gender-based violence and child protection AORs, or subclusters, as they're called in some countries here in Ethiopia. And of course, our referral pathways are interlinked, and we are working closely together, especially when it comes to survivor support, but we do have different mandates within the country as well. And of course, when it comes to the SH component, we are working very closely with the HR working group in the country. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we have a large network with a lot of focal points in Ethiopia. And yes, UN agencies are very much represented, but so are NGOs. So it's international and national NGOs, women-led CSOs, and we also have 4 government partners involved and actively contributing both at national level, which is in Addis Ababa, but also in our regional sub-networks, which are currently in Tigray, where we have 2 networks, in Somali region, in Oromia, in SNNP, in Gambella, Afar, and Amara. So I feel like in Ethiopia, what we're really focused on since the establishment is to take it beyond the UN And we also have, technical working groups as forums in which our focal points can meet from different organizations and agencies. And this is especially relevant when it comes to, capacity building, community engagement, implementing partner capacity assessment, and of course, the establishment of interagency CBCMs, as we do see that, affected populations, survivors, and others do not differentiate between organizations, UN, government, NGOs, CSOs, and so forth when they're seeking support, seeking help, or wanting to report a case. So that's sort of how the dynamics are currently in Ethiopia. And I know it's different from country to country, but that's sort of how we're seeing it. And of course, we want more UN agencies than UNHCR to get involved with the scheme. And that's what we're working actively on with INES at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria, for addressing all the questions. Let me get back to answer a few more questions as well. And it's related to, whether there a plan to expand the scheme to cover additional misconducts beyond the safeguarding sexual exploitation and abuse, like other child abuse and other misconducts. And also there is a question about confidentiality and also how to protect for false allegations and sharing such false allegations among the organization, how to verify the information shared by one organization is true. If there any verification process in the scheme. This is the other question. And the last question for you is would be about if an information shared from one organization to other, it helps to prevent from hiring someone with the safeguarding background. But in terms of support to the affected people, is there any plan on the scheme to expand? I know Maria may come back on this, that the PSA network has a program, but in terms of the misconduct disclosure scheme, beyond the disclosure, is there any other support available? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mikael, and thank you so much to all the participants. Those are very good questions. So let me start let me just build quickly first on what Maria said about the other UN agencies. So right now this is working quite well, and the only reason for pilot with UNHCR is that UN's internal structure is quite complex. So we just wanted to make sure that this works for both our current members, so small local NGOs, but also for the UN, and that's why we are trying to find a way, but there are no issues whatsoever, which is great news. When it comes to expanding the scheme to other types of misconduct, we started with with SCA for the following reason. So usually we found out that in the recruitment practices, the questions related to other types of misconduct, such as fraud or performance, some issues with performance have been already asked. And there was this uneasiness about the SCH. And I think that even the questions today about the legal part of the disclosure, how do we manage it? How do we make sure this is not blacklisting? How do we verify organizations? I think that all of this is showing that there is still some uneasiness when it comes to there is still some uneasiness when it comes to this type of information, and that's why the scheme is focusing only on this type of disclosure. We don't have the plans to expand the scope at this point, but we are also always encouraging organizations to make sure that this is something you are including on your own. Because it's not like you need to use only the form which I've shared in the chat box to request the references. You are free to add any questions which you think are important for your organization. So it's very important to ask for everything you would like to learn about. And then when it comes to types of misconduct, yes, so I've answered that. Right now we are focusing only on SCH. When it comes to confidentiality and false allegations, so yes, this is a problem, and I recognize that this is tricky and that we all have to navigate this. So up to date, we've had a case of an employer who was retaliating against the past employee for no good reason, really. But I think this is much easier to manage because that individual just flagged in their application form that they had issues with their past employers and that likely the references will be bad. So the organization who was hiring this person spoken with both that person and past employer and decided that the past employer is just raising some false allegations and decided to hire this person. And I mean, the scheme gives you some flexibility when it comes to this, and this is why it's important to make sure that you have more information, because in the end it's you who is making the decision if you want to hire that person. And then when it comes to verifying organizations, we are doing checks when an organization is joining the scheme to make sure that those organizations are serious about disclosing information. And I would say that we try to protect all MDS members a little bit, because of course we are all in this together and it's important to just support each other. And then the last question was about any plans beyond the disclosure and any support available. So no, unfortunately, right now the scheme is looking only at improving the referencing checks, and we don't have the capacity to provide any other support. But I think there is lots of other initiatives available which can support this. So Maria or Mikhail, you actually might want to add to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If I have time, I will try to say something in summary, but I will give 1 minute to Maria to say a few words about survival center approach and about the support available through PSA network. Maria?
I think my sound is off. Sorry, Michael. What was the question exactly?
The question is about survival-centered approach. This scheme is about more of information sharing rather than support. And I said PSA network has the support mechanism, and Maria could say a few words about survival-centered approach and support available for victims.
Yeah, so I mean, in Ethiopia, what we're doing, as I was talking about earlier, is that we work very closely with the child protection and the GBV AOR/subcluster. And our standard operating procedures are closely linked to their MAP referral pathways. What we are also doing is that we are emphasizing within the current country context where we're seeing, access issues and constraints, and also, not always GBV specialists and service providers available, is that we are emphasizing basic survivor support for our focal points, but also cluster partners and other partners when it comes to what to do if a GBV actor is not available. And for instance, now in Ethiopia, what we are doing is that we have an ongoing TOT this week, specifically focusing on this due to the current access issues that I know many other country offices are facing as well. For me, survivor support really goes down to, meaningful access, putting women and girls and people with disability first in our programming, as we know these are the groups that are most at risk. And then also emphasizing, confidentiality, emphasizing informed consent, because we do have mandatory reporting as PSCA focal points, or actually everyone has mandatory reporting when it comes to SCA. So it's really important for us to really emphasize informed consent within our SOPs and so forth. So that's really how we are putting, men, women, children from different intersectional background in the forefront in our preparedness and response in Ethiopia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I believe we all have benefited from this webinar. I know that time is an issue and we cannot cover more questions. More questions and feedbacks are coming, but we have shared the link of the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme as well as the RSH website. And you could also benefit by be member on RSH community practice and Telegram group, you'll learn more. Thank you very much for your actively participating in this webinar. I hope this webinar will help employers to enhance their recruitment practices, to have robust reference checking process and honest feedback sharing among organizations. So we have a pool that how we will display so that please provide your feedback, and we really appreciate your time and your attendance across the world. Thank you very much.